Welcome to I Am Maria podcast, a space where we explore the impact stories that inspire us to be who we are today, showing how our personal decisions and tools shape our lives. Today's episode is very special to me because I knock at a door that I didn't know that it was going to open. I follow Danny Klein for many months and years now. And for me, it is an honor that Danny told me that he wanted to support and that he believed on this project. Danny, you were my one of my goals to bring a speaker like you on this space. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I don't hear that often, so I appreciate it.
So we're going to go today beyond the headlines with Danny Klein, which, if you work in the QSR industry, you know who I have the pleasure of speaking with. And Danny's story caught my attention. I listened to an episode in a podcast that you were part of it, and that you kind of, drove us to into your journalist and diverse experience. But what stood the most from your story to me, Danny, is how the QSR industry, the quick service restaurant, became more than just a beat that covered, but just really changed your life. So I know the QSR world is filled with passion and the people who serve others. And that's kind of what motivated you also when you took this opportunity that your wife found when looking to moving to North Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. But then incredible connections led to this, meaningful stories in a major industry event like the QSR Evolution Conference that expanded in just a year. But beyond your work, I know, Danny, that you have a life and you have shared that in your posts in your LinkedIn as well. And I love how your community is full of support. And that is very rare to change. So today, we're going beyond the industry talk and we're going to discover Danny Klein as a person, his journey, and the lessons along the way.
All right, that's sounds good. A little a little scary, but I think a good scary, so I'm ready.
It is a good scary. And my first question to you, Danny, is who is Danny Klein?
Um, so I guess on the base level, as you mentioned, someone who works in the QSR and FSR or just general restaurant industry right now, covering it from the perspective of, yeah, the one I guess I've always had, just being kind of on the media side. As a person, evolving, I would say, I think it's something for me has changed a lot in the last few years, partly because of my personal life of just having children. And, I think people understand what that will do to you. But then also professionally, I was kind of always somebody who I would characterize as I was really comfortable being kind of given my assignments on Sunday and then, go out throughout the week and put my head down and just work without talking to anybody. My colleagues used to kind of make fun of me. They would have this like pose where they would, be bent over their computer typing, and that was like, eating a pen, which was kind of who I was. And then I got put in a position to manage people and then to learn that in some ways you have to figure out parts of your job that are not just, creating and making content and doing things every day. It's like the managing and the leading and the hiring and understanding that you have all these people now that you're responsible for as a person, their happiness on a day to day of whether or not they want to come to work, if they get up in the morning and they see a message from me and they're like, oh God, not him again. Like, how do you lead in a manner that gives them a fulfilling career and that they're able to then to go do their best? And so that's really been an evolving thing for me, and continues to be. So, I struggle with that a lot on a day-to-day basis of just understanding like what parts of my job right now have changed, and who are these people, around me now that I'm trying to help, in life. And then, of course, balancing all those work side things out with the fact that I have a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old and a wife who is, also going to work, and all these challenges that you have kind of on the day to day. And yeah, it's so who I am, I don't know. It's something that's changes by the era of my life. You can get probably pretty deep into some of my motivations and where a lot of these things started, but I guess that's kind of the overview.
I love that. And yeah, as you said, it is part of the evolution, right? And the experiences and the decisions that you go through life. And I can ask you about one decision, but I know that's going to be hard. So maybe let's talk about one, three decisions, important decisions that have led you to the life um, and the person that you are today.
So, how far back in life to go here? It's kind of an interesting thing. I get asked a lot of times about, just how I sort of am the way that I do certain things, and there's a lot of different answers, and it kind of depends on how much I feel like telling somebody. But I'll kind of, when I was younger, I guess we all have these moments in our lives, and maybe they're not decisions, but they're just things that happen to us. And then when you go to kind of rebuild yourself afterwards, who you become in the aftermath of that. And I think for me, I have sort of this like very one moment when I was 16, when I had this girlfriend that I met when I was 8 years old at a summer camp, like a lot of New York City kids do. We live in the city, we go up to the mountains over the summer. I liked this girl when I was 8. It's obviously you're 8 years old doesn't really mean anything. And she likes, she has every one of the guys in our group as her boyfriend at one time. And, that just basically means she held your hand walking to something, right? But that moment didn't happen to me until I was 14, even though I'd liked her from like 8 to 14. And you have to also remember these are like times in the world where there's no social media, and most of what you base things on is like you think it's this rom-com or whatever. And I had this like summer camp crush from 8 to 14 years old until she finally noticed me. But anyway, to kind of accelerate that story, we were together on as much as somebody is when they're a teenager, from 14 to 16. And then she passed away from cancer, which she just randomly out of nowhere got, and then was, she passed away 1 month later. And it was this crazy thing. I didn't realize she was that sick. Again, you don't have the connective ways that you do to kind of interact with people now. So we mostly were like AIM chatting, late at night because she was on medication. One night she tells me she's not feeling well. I don't hear from her for 2 days, which is not normal. And then her brother calls me to tell me, she's passed away or whatever. And so that period of time from like when I was, I would say 16 to 18 or 19, wasn't the best, in terms of like who I was and what I was doing, and a lot of the ways that I was kind of interacting with the world. And I don't blame myself for that. Obviously, what did I know about how to process that kind of thing, and who I was being? And I went to college far away from where I grew up, partially for that reason, just to kind of reset a lot of things in my life. But anyway, the kind of what I would say a lot, what happened in the now, or if I look back at that moment to like how I've become and the way I've been as a, professional person, and even like obviously a personal person with my kids and wife, is it made me a very empathetic human being. Because I think when you have that much pain and struggle, you kind of learn a lot about like yourself, because you literally have to put the pieces back together of like your own ability to just to survive like your day to day. And so I think now in a lot of things that you see, I like to think in leadership, and then some of the platforms we launched, from our women in restaurant leadership to even the positive engagements that you kind of referenced earlier in the way that I've formed like network building. I think I am an empathetic type of leader or an empathetic type of journalist, and the storytelling that I've chosen to do. And a lot of it comes from if you're, if you go through this period of time as a teenager where you're like, in your corner of your bedroom writing in a journal, every night, which was definitely me for a while. Yeah, I published a book when I was 17. But
Wow.
a lot of this stuff like led to, I think I talk to people a little bit differently. And also and some of the things that it, you know, changed in me, I wish hadn't happened, because I think I'm like a little more restrained probably than I was as a 16-year-old and things like that. But yeah, I mean it's kind of a long story, but I was thinking about it recently, kind of when you reached out, of like, how do I come up with some of the things, or why do I care about some of the stories people tell me? And I do think it's just because I kind of listen differently than a lot of people, and it comes from that kind of source of pain that I had as a teenager. But yeah. I don't share that story too often, so I guess it's good to talk about it once in a while, because I really haven't in a long time. But so I appreciate the platform to do so. But yeah, it's kind of a part of me that I think a lot of people don't know.
That is hard and beautiful at the same time, Danny, how you put it into words. I'm sure that time it was not nice at all. And our memories that come back to life sometimes, and there was so much strength into that situation. I think when you are in the shadow, that's when you find your light. And my next question, it's about your toolbox, which I'm sure also has an evolution and continues to be with you every day. And I'm sure at that time, you're 16 years old struggling with this situation, you started to build your toolbox, and maybe journalism has been part of this. What else is part of this toolbox?
Yeah, I mean the journalism part of it is kind of weird, because I don't think it's really what I had like thought I was going to be doing. And then when I got to college, my father sort of set me on that track, because it was just like, oh, you like to write, what else are you going to do, sort of thing. And I went to become a sports writer. But I do think that kind of almost like backdoor way I got into it. Even when I first started writing, it was like the first thing I ever wrote about was this fishing tournament in Florida, and I ended up writing this story about these guys who were in the tournament, and they had just been in this car accident and all this crazy stuff. And my editor afterwards was like, I don't even know, like, why you even decided, like, where'd you even get this information? And I was like, I don't really know. People just kind of tell me these things, and I guess I look for that sort of thing in my writing, versus being like what you might think is a regular quote unquote journalist. But
Hmm.
um, but yeah, otherwise, obviously, parenthood is a toolbox that you're constantly trying to figure out, like, what kind of parent you want to be. And you've got these influences of, what your parents were like and what they did that you want to emulate, that you suddenly realize how hard it was. And then other parts that you don't want to emulate, things that they did that you want to do differently. And that's, I would say, something that I'm constantly trying to figure out. When you have a 6-year-old, as my daughter is, she was going to demand a lot of you every day. And especially after you come home from work, and you want to be like, I've been working, I'm working on this women in leadership platform that partly has you in mind. But like, obviously she doesn't understand that, because their worlds revolve entirely around themselves and what's happening every single day. And So yeah, that toolbox of just trying to be, the right kind of parent or the parent that I want to be and understanding that like not every day is going to be great. There will be times it's like, you get to the end of the night and you're like, man, like I wish I had been more interested in, what they were saying to me earlier. Like we watch Bluey all the time, right? And and everyone's like, oh, his dad is so great. And you're like, yeah, so his kids are also really well behaved. I don't ever see him have to deal with like them screaming at him, but yeah, it's so that's kind of the thing is, I guess your toolbox as a parent, as a manager of people, those are, as a husband even, kind of the things that I guess I'm trying to figure out still.
That's beautiful. Serving people in a way.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, yeah, yeah, you know that well from being in the industry. You just sometimes I got to figure out like how to serve everybody and like also not cook myself to a crisp. Because that happens. You're dealing with, you mentioned our event there earlier, like there's a million people and a million different things going on at once with something like that, of people asking you about the Wi-Fi or the hotel rooms or complaining about one thing or the other. And all these things you want to give them space or like, can I speak? Can I sit here? I want to be on this panel. There's too many people on it. You just have to like understand like, okay, I'm going to try to help you all. Like not at the expense that like I get to the end of this and I don't even want to be here. And I'm trying to figure that out too, because that is something new in my life. We've only been doing that 2 years, and it's like a whole nother career that I know nothing about. So yeah, it's always a lot, but yeah, it's good.
yeah, it's life, and it seems like you enjoy it. At least we enjoy it. You're like my cafecito in the morning. I wait for your polls and read, um, the articles that you make, and I understand that your journey it's kind of unexpected into like I was not sure to get into journalism, but then you know QSR industry also comes as an unexpected opportunity. And I want to know what was going through your mind when you made that leap into QSR industry. Did it feel like a risk or was it something that you felt like a right move?
Uh, yeah, I was a sports writer, as I think I mentioned there, for about 11 years. And I would say as much more so than me liking it, it was just like a part of my identity. And so when I switched, career paths, it was basically because I thought I was getting laid off. Like my whole department was getting laid off, and I was, told I had 2 months to, find another job. And I ended up not losing my job. They gave me the job of somebody else in a different department. But in that period of time that I was thinking I was getting laid off, I found this job, which actually at the time was not QSR, but it was FSR, which is our full service publication, our sister publication or smaller media entity, was looking for a second editor. And so the main editor flew me out there. I really liked the location of, Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I thought was really cool. Again, my wife really wanted to move to North Carolina, so that's kind of why that job came into my view, is because she sent it to me. She was just searching for North Carolina jobs. I had applied to others, but yeah, I my my first day here, I was very overwhelmed by a few things. I mean, one, I knew nothing about the industry at all. I knew nothing about the way that people talked or about running restaurants. And, everyone that I told I was taking this job to thought I was going to go review and critique, five-star restaurants. And it was not that at all, obviously. So I was pretty scared. And my editor gave me, she was really not a great person, really taught me a lot, but she was also very intense. And she gave me this like 7-page packet of job duties that I would have here, and it was broken down by like time increments. So it would be like 30 minutes on this, 40 on this, an hour on this. And I read through it and I realized I didn't know how to do anything on that in that packet. I didn't know how like so I was like, okay, here's 30 minutes on this website whatever. And I'm like, I've never done that before. Here's this. I've never done that before. And she handed me my very first assignment, which was this 4,500 word magazine feature on restaurant groups and how they scale. And didn't know anything about that either. So I went home and I had moved my wife at the time, and my dogs. Didn't have kids yet. Sold my house in Florida, moved up here, gave up this career that, despite all the kind of craziness, like I was not bad at, or at least I was comfortable at. So I cried. So I cried that night, and my wife, like, this never sees me cry. I don't do that almost ever, but like, I just was so afraid that this wasn't gonna work out, and like, what was I gonna do? I could have stayed there; it would have been all right, I guess. Um, I'd given up this like whole track in my life, and my father kept, he kept saying like, what are you doing again? Like, what is this you're writing about? What is, full service restaurant magazine? And like, why did you do this? He loved that I was a sports writer. So it was tough. It was a lot. And the first, I would say 3, 4, 5 months were a lot. And I was kind of wondering what in the world I was doing. Um, the first person I ever interviewed made me feel a little bit better because he was building a table for the restaurant like in the basement, and he was telling me all this crazy stuff, and I'm like, okay, well, like, you're not that different like than someone in sports. Like, I think I could talk to people in this industry, but it was really just the environment. And I would read them. I read every issue of the magazine for the first, like, they're long. They used to be really long, and I do that every night. I read front to cover, issue after issue for years on end to see, like, just can I understand, like, how I could talk and write like this. And a lot of times I would walk away from that thinking, like, I can't do this. Like, I'm never gonna have this kind of knowledge. I don't understand like how you even wrote this sentence. I don't know what you're talking about. And so I was pretty nervous for a while there. And I would honestly say probably up until like a year and a half later, they came up with a new job because they wanted somebody to like run the websites. That was the way the media world was going, as everybody knows. Like, we were kind of, we were very, very heavy print, 75% of our revenue, and things were starting to shift. So they thought, like, let's start looking at the website closer. Let's look at our digital products closer. And let's take that guy who worked as a sports writer at a newspaper and put him on top of it because he's used to writing like a bunch of stuff every week. And part of me was like, well, I didn't really like doing that. So it's not like I want to come here and write 20 articles a week, but okay. And that's when QSR entered my life because I became in charge of both websites, so FSR and QSR. And that was when I got introduced to that side of the sector. And everything from that point on really got a lot better. The website job, as much as I was wary about it, my dad, he told me at the time, he's like, if they think you're going to be good at this, don't disagree with them because they're never going to ask you to do anything again after that. And I'm like, okay, I get what you're saying. And so I was like, yeah, I'd love to do this website job and get back to writing 15 stories every week. And ended up just really having the freedom once that moment came to start doing things as I saw fit. That was probably the best part of it, was like I just started writing at that point what I wanted to write. I didn't have anyone giving me assignments anymore. And I started to talk to people I wanted to talk to, and things just really started to take off. And it coincided with, I would just say, how the world of media was moving digitally at that time. But our digital property has just changed, and I really enjoyed kind of spearheading that and being able to create something that wasn't there before. Again, I had no idea if I had that skill or if I even wanted it. That's when the LinkedIn stuff started to begin, was back in 2016, because I was like, okay, well, we don't do anything here. I'm going to hop on here. I created the pages for the brands. I started to post my dog and and all this other stuff. And yeah, and I get asked a lot of times now, like internally, from other editors, how'd you get to this amount of followers? How'd you get this level of engagement? It's like, well, I started 9 years ago. for starters. And then the other part is I just kept doing it over and over again, even when people weren't paying attention. And yeah, so that's a it's a long answer, but it ended up being probably the smartest thing I ever did, honestly. Moving from that to here because it allowed me to have a normal schedule. It allowed me to really, you know, move up the ladder in a way I never would have at a newspaper and to get to points in my career I would never have, and then to, have a family and all that. So it was a very, very smart, even though I wouldn't take credit for it, decision, because it really did change my life.
That's amazing. And of course, we're going to get into how, how you balance your day to day, your personal habits and your work. But I want to stay for a little bit more into, yeah, QSR industry. That's your job per se, write about it. But this word, QSR words, really filled with people that love serving guests, feeding people. It's really surrounded by passionate people, service driven mindset. How does that shape your personality every day?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what I was saying, like with that first guy building the basements or the tables in his basement. That ended up being a much more common type story than it was an outlier. I mean, people in this industry, to your point, they are mostly servant-minded individuals, and so they are just great to talk to and to collaborate with. I think the restaurant industry, historically speaking, is not great at collaborating with one another. And so we have a pretty interesting role in media of sharing stories that don't get shared otherwise, and to kind of serve as like what I like to call as the, center of gravity for a lot of these people to come towards. So conferences, right? Like, people, that's my favorite thing about that process is watching the connections kind of bloom out and knowing that like you created this space. I mean, with our World Conference, that's 95% of why it exists, in my opinion, and why people like it is because we just created a world for them to come to and to meet each other. And nothing to do like with me or even the programming to an extent or the education. Like that's all very vital and anchor points of it. But the real benefit of it is what comes after. So like I was at a different event recently. And a lot of the women who met each other at our first Whirl event last year, they like were clustering together. They were getting lunch together. They were going out at night together. And they were basically just like hanging together to navigate what's this larger, scarier, big event. And to watch that, that's kind of, I think you see like what the restaurant industry is great at, that relationship building and the fact that, most people who get into hospitality are going to have a different mindset than some other industries. And so for me as a person, I think everyone who stays in this industry has a similar story of like, yeah, it's really hard or the margins are terrible or whatever, but like you get kind of addicted to the nature of it and it gets in your veins and you want to continue to lead that. So like from my perspective, I just want to continue to serve that from like a media side, like figure out how can I connect people or like what can I do to tell a story that helps somebody else or just to get out there like what they've been through. And so we do a lot of, coverage that I think reflects that, may be different than some other media properties and that we'll tell the story of the smallest restaurant out there. Recently one of our employees went into a like a one store donut chain in San Diego and called me to tell me how great it was. So now we're gonna go write that person's story, and
Oh,
so
wow.
and we do that. We have what we call a ones to watch. We've been doing that for years. So we cover the small fast casuals, we cover the McDonald's of the world and everything in between. And I think we try to do it in a way that's about the people, as much as it is about the kind of nuts and bolts and like bringing those things and showing that you can be a a B2B media outlet that does those things in tandem. I think that was one of the things actually when I started, my editor used to get mad at me about. She'd be like, this is not business enough. And thankfully, eventually, like I just was like, look, it doesn't have to be. Like it'll be okay. People will learn from this if we humanize some of what we're doing. And so yeah, I think it affects obviously my kind of motivation to do a good job. I want to do a good job for these people the same way as you might want to do that for a customer if you're a corporate franchisor person or whatever it is. I think I'm influenced by that of being kind of swept up in that same wave of hospitality that we all are.
I love that. And I love the fact of connecting people because personally, I love that conference last year and I'm very looking forward to go to the one this year. And I'm gonna take this chance to ask you about the QSR Evolution Conference, how you got into that. And also last year it was a woman in restaurant leadership platform. The pizza forum is coming this year too. So why you don't drive
Yeah.
us into that journey?
Yeah, so we at QSR and FSR for that matter did not have a conference for many, many, many years. And reason was simple. We just didn't really need one. We were privately owned. This amazing guy who, is still very important to me, who used to have an office next door to me, but he sold the company a couple years ago. I think it's about 2.5 years at this point. And yeah, our new ownership, and one of the first things they kind of was like, well, what could we add value to or what's missing here? And the answer was an event. And so, part of us were like sitting there going like, oh God, we're really gonna have to do this. Like, where do we begin? Because the restaurant space has so many events,
Mm.
especially around the time that QSR Evolution is. There's like 5 conferences within a 2-month period of time, right? So how can we make it a little bit different, or like what are we gonna do that's reflective of who we are and like in our vision? And the initial answer to that was I was just probably a lot more involved in the process than I would say most people in my position would be. And I still am. I set every single education track. I pick every single speaker, which is a process. Trust me.
Can't imagine.
But it was such a funny thing because like out of the gate, when we first were doing it, I'd reach out to all these brands to, whoever, and they would be like, "What is this? What are you talking about? Like, who else is going?" And it was a struggle for a minute there because, as much as they love us and trust us and had a relationship there, they were like, we don't really know like what you're referencing and
Mm.
where's the case study. And so, I put it in Atlanta, and I did that for a very specific reason, which was just that I was going to go stick it in the backyard of where a lot of QSR restaurants already were, versus like how you see a lot of conferences go to like a really cool city, right? Not to say Atlanta's not cool, but like I don't know that it's like on your, destination vacation of like a lot of people, might be like a Nashville or a, California or Santa Barbara or some of these other places I've been to events. And I went to Chick-fil-A and I was just like, look, you're sitting here. I've known you for years. I obviously am someone who admires the brand from a professional standpoint, consumer, whatever, our relationship. Would you be interested in doing this keynote in year one? I didn't think they would say yes. They say no to me all the time, but in a very nice way, which is kind of how our relationship was at that point. And they said yes. Like 2 weeks later, CEO was like, he doesn't really do this, but he thinks this looks cool. He wants to kind of come out there and tell the story. And once that moment happened, everything changed because I stopped having to explain to people what this was. Because I'd just be like, look, Andrew Cathy is coming and he's speaking. Do you want to come speak? And everyone said yes. And then next thing you knew, we had 161 speakers, and we really took a approach of being like, let's put a lot of speakers at this event because we want this to be content forward like our magazine is. We want it to be about the restaurant operator. We want this to be for the restaurant operator. So I don't pay anybody. I don't pay speakers. I don't, they don't, they cover their own travel, they cover their own lodging. I don't give them any stipends. And the idea there is that this is almost like they're as much volunteers as they are speakers. And so they're not beholden in that situation to anything. They don't have to speed date somebody on the vendor side. They can
Mhm.
do whatever they want with this conference. They want to come speak, walk out the door. Cool, good for whatever you want to do. So my thought was if I take that approach, it may come off a little more organic in the end, right? Let them pick what panels they're talking on. They're not being brought here by a vendor, and nothing wrong with that model. I was just looking for something different. So like instead of a delivery panel hosted by a delivery aggregator where they bring four people, I'm going to do a delivery panel and I'm going to put whoever I want on it. And they might disagree with each other and they might not like the aggregator and, whatever it might be. So we end up with this situation where it's very clear that this is about the content, it's about the conversation, it's about moving things forward. Again, that's where the name evolution came from. How do we evolve this together? And that's really kind of how it started. So year one, small venue in Atlanta, smallish. Supposed to sit 600 people. We put 800 people in there. If it was up to me, I would have left it there forever. But that isn't how the world works. So then we moved it to a larger venue in Atlanta in year two, had about 1,200 people. And yeah, it's and to your point, it's got these different elements to it now. It has the Next Gen Restaurant Summit, which is basically the full service track, and it's geared toward like emerging full service operators. Anyone between like 5 and 200 units, and also has a pizza side that came into the play last year after we acquired PMQ Pizza Magazine. So yeah, it keeps just evolving into new things. It's actually very much on my mind right now because I'm deep into the process. I'm probably going to open registration on February 13th. I don't know when this airs, but if it's before or after, then be on the lookout for that. I have most of the programming finished right now. There's some pieces, as you probably are aware, that I'm trying to secure here. But for the most part, it's coming together. So that'll be back in September. And the Women in Leadership platform that you mentioned there, that's a whole nother thing that came out of nowhere. Actually came from the first version of this conference when we had a networking hour, and the networking hour for women in the industry was just insanely popular. We did not have a big enough room, and people started to complain to me about like, oh, my friend didn't get in here, but he got in here, and there was no programming, and then no one spoke, and I hadn't meant to speak. I had picked like a few women to speak, but we got in there and they were like, let's just drink. And I was like, okay. So I spun that off as a separate event, based on like just the energy and the interest level in it. So that turned into a conference in Nashville last February. It's going to be coming up here in 2.5 weeks in year two, and that has been really great. It's grown exponentially. We sold it out, which I've never done before with any event. And so, yeah, I'm glad you like the events there. We're still trying to figure out a lot of the pieces. I hired an MC this year, so be on the lookout for that. Someone to help kind of balance my like leveled out energy. So he's a little more we'll just say like charismatic than I am. So like he's going to hype up the crowd and get people going like at the beginning and throughout the event. So he's going to be kind of like my counterpoint person where you have like my like level 5 energy and then he's like a level 12. So I'm excited about that because he's great. He used to actually be Ronald McDonald years ago. He was the like actual clown. So he's got connections to the industry. He worked at a large franchise organization in their community department. And he also was a clown at Barnum and Bailey before that. But yeah, he's just gonna be really fun. So you'll see like things this year involving the crowd and stuff that we haven't had in the past. So
Woo
Yeah, yeah, stay
woo.
tuned. Stay tuned. A lot more to come.
How exciting. I can't wait. And cheers, really. Congratulations. It's your children, your dog, your life, all these projects. I'm sure there's a lot of energy that, you have to balance. And I know that in one of your interviews, you learned that the CEO, I believe it was from Chick-fil-A, he teaches his children how to read P&L. And I'm asking you, with all the information that, flows through you, do you do something similar with your family? I believe this is really cool,
Yeah,
but
no.
hard.
No, well, that was were you there? You were just there in year two, right? You didn't come to year one?
No, it was only last year.
Okay, so yeah, that was at the conference in year one where he was telling everybody in the crowd that he reads his children P&Ls and yeah, so I made a joke to him at the time, like on stage, that I read my son this book about owls, and so like what is he going to grow up to be or whatever, and and so that's very much true. Like yeah, he's a different. So CEOs in general, like someone was asking me this other day about Starbucks. They're like, he was doing so well at Chipotle and blah blah blah. Like why would he go do this? And I'm like, if you knew CEOs and how they operate and like what their brains are like, you would understand like why he would do this. That's just how they're wired. They've got to go and create and start over and build and do that over and on repeat. And so people like Andrew Cathy, reading their children P&Ls, like he's just a different level of person than your average person like me. And I know that there are obviously common threads between all of us, but he was, he had that kind of experience growing up too, right? His family and his father and his grandfather and the things that they had him going through in the Chick-fil-A stores and all that stuff. So he's living that life, you know, he's passing it down. I'm not reading my children P&Ls, and not because I don't think it's a good idea, but just because I wouldn't even know where to begin. And so yeah, we're reading dinosaurs and whatever because yeah, everybody's different. I'm not smart on that level.
Well, it's always, cool to think about it. But Danny, changing the topic a little bit here. Your community, and I'm part of it. We are incredible supportive and we engage with your work that feels very genuine. What has helped you to build such an authentic connections? And I know it's been 9 years and plus, but how have you done it?
Yeah, I mean it's pretty simple, honestly. I just so like 9 years ago, LinkedIn was pretty strict in like how people viewed it. It was pretty buttoned up. Um, I just didn't look at it that way. I just post what I feel like posting when I feel like doing it about whatever it is that I want to talk about. So like I don't schedule posts. I don't have a sense of like what I'm doing every morning. I know a lot of people who do that, and for me, it's hard to do that and to also be authentic because you just change how you feel. Like, this morning I posted about this Bloody Mary bar thing, and I'm like, and I don't know why I decided to suddenly do that. I've known about that for 2, 3 weeks. I just got this morning, I was like, I'm just gonna post about this, or if I want to post about my dog or whatever it might be. But what I think is critical to that, this is something I talk about a lot now that I manage a lot of people, is that you cannot, first of all, you can't replicate that if that's not who you are. I mean, if you don't want to be kind of like offbeat and personal and vulnerable, you can't fake it, for starters. And secondly, like you can't only be that person. Like if that's all I did every day, it wouldn't work. So like you also have to be relevant. So I try to get editors and people to realize like you got to hit them with like the type of content that's not going to have that many likes, if you want to use that sort of way to look at it. It might
Mm.
just be like a really in-depth story on Burger King today, like, but if you're not delivering value to your industry and like presenting yourself as being actually like a resource for people in their careers, like you can't really just throw out these like dog photos once in a while because it only works, in my opinion, because of that balance. Because I do cover the industry and I do write and talk and interview and share content that I hope is valuable to a lot of people in QSR and FSR. And then, yeah, if I want to kind of be like a little bit more authentically me once in a while, it's okay, right? Because like I might follow it up with something a little more hard hitting. But yeah, so to me, it's those two things. It's like you got to be who you want to be. You can't be like controlled by some narrative of like this is how you many times a week you got to post, or this is like your voice you got to use, or you got to be more personal. Like you just have to do what you believe in. And then secondly, like, yeah, you got to balance it out. And I think if you don't have content, this is something I talk about all the time now. It's really hard to be good at that because like if you don't write and you don't interview and you don't do enough within the industry, then you end up being like what I see out there a lot, which is you're just like a call to action person. Like, hey, come register for this, or come to this event I'm doing, or come watch this video that my colleague did. And if that's all you ever do, like I think people start to tune you out because you yourself are not like, you just feel as though you're, trying to like, you're almost like a sales media person. And the other part too is like, LinkedIn could get a little bit inauthentic at times. I'm thrilled about this. I'm excited about this. And it is really a platform meant to celebrate like your own achievements and those of others. But yeah, just do it in a way that you feel good about. Um, if you're not excited about something, don't pretend that you are. That's something I try to get across a lot is like I promote things that I believe in. Um, and I think that's something like I think internally they'll be like, well, why didn't you post about this? And I was like, well, I didn't really want to. And I'm not beholden to like do anything like that. So I think that's the key is like control your own narrative, be who you are, and strike a balance of being both relevant and personal. And you'll find that people will start to come to you if you're accessible and you're open to having conversations. We all get messages on there we want to ignore, and I do ignore most of them. But just be somebody that seems like a real person that's approachable. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. That's the thing is like I don't have a strategy. That's my strategy.
Love it.
Because
Very
I
organic.
get asked, yeah, I get asked to like write it down sometimes, and I don't really have one. That's I guess what I'm doing. It's like I don't know.
Love it. Unique, authentic, and that's what we enjoy. So, Danny, I'm gonna start wrapping up, and I'm going to ask a few questions here because I don't want to, ask one and then the other one. But where do you see yourself in 10 years, and what small steps are you taking today for that? And then, if you could go back in time and give an advice to your younger self at the time, when you started your career, what would it be?
Yeah, well, let's see. In 10 years, time starts to move differently when you get like into this part of your career. And 10 years to me doesn't probably sound as long as it did 10 years ago. What you think about is like so much changed. I'm coming on being here for 10 years, and so like that was another 10 years. Um, so yeah, I don't really see myself being elsewhere now in terms of like what does my job look like and what would I be doing here? I have no idea. Because I had no idea I'd be doing the things I'm doing today 2 years ago. Truly, I really had no clue. I did not realize we were going to get acquired by this larger company, that I was going to become part of this big ecosystem, that I was going to be having conversations about convenience stores and pizza with other editors that I now manage. And So yeah, I just would like to still be doing what I'm doing and still be hopefully making a difference in that. I would obviously like our conferences and our other elements to become very lasting parts of this industry and things that people really look forward to for the value they provide, especially the women in leadership platform. I have, that's really, I mean, that I think can get as large or as we want it to. And that's something we have to figure out. Where is that going? The
Mm,
person I hired to run that Satine, she's truly, I mean, one of the key parts of my job right now is trying to help, harness how great she is, to make sure I'm doing the things that I can to free her to be as successful as she has been already and continues to be. I mean, she's 20, two, I think, and you think about what she has in front of her, that's part of my job right now is making that next 10 years for her make sense because she's the one who could go take over the world, right? Um, but in terms of advice for my younger self, I mean, I think I knew this. If I like, I don't think I was unaware of this back then. I've always kind of believed this, but I think there's something to be said about just like sticking around somewhere. If I get asked this once in a while, it's like, how did you become the VP of editorial or whatever? And I'm like, well, I just didn't leave. Like, I
mm,
was here when this person was above me and that person was above me, and I didn't leapfrog these people. They just left, and I just stuck it out. And maybe I didn't love it at this point in time, at one moment and or another, but I just waited to see like what's on the other side. And if you do that and you believe and you keep working hard, obviously, assuming you work for a good organization like I do and have over the years, like you will get to where you want to be if you just stay with something. I know a lot of people, young people in particular, they job hop a lot, happens in the restaurant industry and for a lot of reasons, and most of the time when they do that, it's to get an elevated title or to go do something else or to get more money or whatever. And I understand that. I've been there too, but there is something to be said about just not leaving. And that's what I would tell my younger self is just stick around. Maybe it doesn't work out, maybe it does, but you're not going to figure it out if you go somewhere else because then you got to hit reset over and over again
mhm,
and just see what happens. You don't like your boss, or you don't like what they're saying, or you don't like the direction. And by the way, I've liked all my bosses here. That's not a thing, but just stick around and see how it changes. You may be organizing a conference in 2 years that you never thought you would be. So you do not know what's on the other side unless you wait around to see what it is.
that's true. And it all starts with a thank you. And I want to thank you, Danny, for being here. And I want to ask you this one last question, which is what would you like people listening to this episode to take away from your story? I know you just said a lot, and maybe it's just repeating a little bit from it, but making a habit, to appreciate you, your story, um, really shape my perspective of life. And I want to make sure that the audience also takes a great perspective here from your story.
Yeah, I would say, and this is pretty cliche, honestly, but the people part of what you do professionally is so important. And for me, and if you're a young journalist out there, when you go to interview somebody, and you just think it to yourself, like this might be the only time they get in the media coverage, or they're talking to you and entrusting you with sharing, whatever it is they might be willing to tell you. So just ask questions once in a while that maybe tries to figure out like why is somebody doing this? And that human element of running a business or running a QSR or being in this industry, it gets overlooked sometimes. And that is really what people relate to and they come back to if you're doing conferences and you're trying to figure out how to interview somebody or you're trying to figure out how to write an article, for me, so much of what I've learned is just if I just tell somebody's story, that's really what they want. And then other people want to read it because it makes them feel either that they understand what's happening, they can relate to that, or they can aspire to become this, and the same is true of everything that you do from your coworkers. Try to understand that these are people and they're going to be the ones who help you be successful. If you can't trust them, with what you're telling them to do, that's the start of a problem. Um, believe in that their capabilities to go out and execute whatever vision that you have. And if you do that, you'll start to realize like we all are kind of going in the same direction. And that's something I've really learned, and it is very, very, very hard. Um, but if people see that human side of you, it does come a lot easier. And that is true too as a parent and anybody, as a friend, there's somebody just start to just figure out why people are, have empathy or just ask them why they're doing something, or why they feel that way. We're all narcissistic, especially journalists. The fact that we put our names on our articles is a sign that there's a certain type of person this job, attracts, and being on video and being on podcasts and all these different things where like it's like, you're front and center. It's a very unique career in that respect. But just pay attention to other people and to why they're sitting next to you and why they might be sharing that stage with you or calling you on Zoom to do an interview. And I do think that that will be a lesson that goes into a lot of parts of your life.
Thank you so much, Danny, again. And see you at conference.
Yeah, see you in September.